How's it going, everyone, and welcome back. My name is Danny, and this is Drinking with a Ginger. Tonight, I'm drinking an IPA, another one. I drank one in the last episode, but tonight I decided to drink another one as well. This one is made by Modern Times, which is a brewery in San Diego, California. I believe the name of this one is Dymaxion, Dymaxion. It's the only word on this can other than Modern Times and the government warning. So I'm gonna go with that's the name of the beer. It's pretty good. It's got your standard IPA taste. You'll probably sense a running theme with this podcast. I'm a big IPA fan, so those will probably be on the majority of the episodes that I'm drinking beer. Every now and then I will branch out, but that's usually what I'm drinking. If I decide to not go cheap and just get like Bud Light or Coors Light or something. So tonight I kind of wanted to go on a little bit of a sports rant, if you will. Something that has bothered me for quite some time, and it's not really that big of a deal, but for some reason it just bothers the hell out of me, and that's the division or conference lineups for sports. For the most part, they do fall in line, and the alignment of where teams are located usually goes pretty well with the conference and or the divisions. But there are a few examples that do bother me. Some of them more than others. Some are just little ticky-tack things. But other ones, they really make me stop and think what the commissioner of the league and the owners of the league were thinking when they decided to go these routes with the conferences and or divisions. So first off is the NFL. The two main ones that stick out in my head, now that the Rams are back in LA, they don't fall in this category anymore. They're a part of the NFC West, but when they were in St. Louis, it definitely brought the question, why in the hell is a Missouri team considered a West Coast Conference team? Or, I'm sorry, a West Coast Division team. But now that they have relocated back to LA, they do fall in line with being in the NFC West. So the two biggest ones that come to mind when talking about the NFL are the Cowboys and the Colts. The Cowboys, as I'm sure the majority of you guys know, are located in Dallas, Texas. In the NFL, their division is the NFC East. Now, I don't know if you guys are big into geography, but Texas is not near the East Coast. It's dead smack center of the country. So how the Cowboys got into the NFC East, I'm not quite sure. I feel like they could more belong with the NFC South, if anything. Moving them to the South would ultimately give the South 5 teams and the East 3, so they could always just realign and put the Carolina Panthers, who are along the East Coast in Charlotte, North Carolina. They could just put them in the NFC East. Now, obviously, that would definitely affect rivalries in the NFL, especially since, I mean, it is the Cowboys. It's one of the most viewed and talked about teams in the NFL. And they do have major rivalries both with the Redskins and the Eagles. So those would be affected. I don't know. It has bothered me for a long time that the Cowboys are in the East, especially when the Rams were in St. Louis. I always wondered why the Rams didn't just go in the East and the Cowboys went to the West. I mean, you could always just realign divisions, but that one, I don't know, for some reason that one just really bothered me. And then the other one that I had mentioned was the Indianapolis Colts. They are in Indianapolis, Indiana, but they are in the AFC South. Again, I don't know if you guys are geography buffs, but northern Indiana is nowhere near the southern states. It's the exact opposite end of the country. So how they got grouped in with southern teams such as the Texans, the Titans, who are in Tennessee, and the Jacksonville Jaguars, I have no idea. Yeah, it's another one that's extremely confusing, and I believe if it were an easy fix, I would say that the Colts could just go to the AFC North, which is what they probably should have been in the first place, and that's currently built up with the Bengals, the Browns, the Steelers, and the Ravens. And then you could always just push the Ravens out to the AFC South, which, I mean, out of those four teams, either the Ravens or the Steelers, not exactly sure which one's more south. They're pretty even, but, I mean, either one, even though those are two huge rivalries in the NFL. But one of those two teams could go to the south. I just think it's a little ridiculous that the Indianapolis Colts are in a southern division. Another one that kind of bothers me is the Kansas City Chiefs. They play on the border of Kansas and Missouri, which is about central country, and they play in the AFC West. Now, that's not as bad as the other ones, but, I mean, they were only one state over from where St. Louis played. That's another one that's just, it's kind of ticky-tack, but it's weird. I don't know. Doesn't quite make sense. Like I said, they are in the center of the country, but I guess being in the center of the country, they can go to the south or the west. Those would be the two closest spots. But yeah, they're ultimately in the west with the Chargers, the Broncos, and the Raiders. So I mean that makes sense. When I was looking at these, however, there were about three to four divisions that stood out as regionally aligned. They were almost flawless, which was the AFC East, the Patriots, the Dolphins. Actually, now that I'm looking at it, you could even argue, I don't know why I didn't think of this earlier, you could actually argue instead of moving the Ravens or the Steelers to the AFC South, you can move the Dolphins to the South and then move either the Ravens or the Steelers to the AFC East. And then, because, I mean, those are all Northeast teams. You got the Patriots, the Bills, and the Jets. And it doesn't really make sense putting a Miami team in there. So, yeah, you could toss Baltimore over there and then just keep the Steelers in the north, put Miami Dolphins in the south. That makes a lot more sense. So the AFC East, with my realignment, would be the Patriots, the Bills, the Jets, and the Ravens. And then the North would be the Steelers, the Browns, the Bengals, and the Colts. And the South would be the Texans, the Dolphins, the Titans, and the Jaguars. That makes a hell of a lot more sense than how they have it. I mean, I feel like divisions should all be relatively close to each other. So, I mean, that does make sense. The NFC North is pretty flawless. You got the Bears, the Vikings, the Packers, and the Lions. And as well as the NFC West, you got now it makes more sense that the Rams relocated. You got the Rams in L.A., and then Seattle Seahawks, San Francisco 49ers, and the Arizona Cardinals. So those all make pretty good sense. But yeah, it's definitely, as far as the four major sports, I think the NFL brings out the most confusing divisions. They're kind of, there's a few that they almost seem randomly placed, just like, hey, who has an opening because we just want to toss this team in somewhere. So moving on to the next one, the NBA. That one isn't quite as bad, but there are a couple. Mainly for me, it would be Memphis, which is in Tennessee. I mean, granted, it's on the western part of Tennessee, and it's actually on the border of Tennessee and I believe Iowa. I think it's Iowa or maybe Missouri. Hold on one second. I'm not exactly sure where it's at. I've driven through it a couple times, but I can't remember what the hell the state is next to Tennessee. Oh, it's Arkansas. Missouri's a little more north. All right. So, yeah, Memphis is right on the border of Arkansas and Tennessee. So that being in the West is kind of weird. It is still, I would say, on the eastern third of the country. So I don't know how they got placed in the Western Conference. Also, a side note, Memphis has an extremely big Bass Pro Shop in there, and it looks like a big pyramid, and it has a huge logo that says Bass Pro Shop. It's right off the highway. Super awesome. That I'm not sure if that's quite on the bucket list to go there one day, but it's definitely on my to-do list. Anyways, back to it. With the NBA, yeah, like I said, Memphis being in the Western Conference, that's kind of weird. I mean, you can. It's actually kind of hard to argue with any other of the cities, because the closest Eastern Conference team is in probably Chicago. Chicago or maybe even Milwaukee. I'm not quite sure where in Wisconsin Milwaukee is. But, it is pretty far east. So how they ended up in the Western Conference is kind of weird. But that also brings up New Orleans, which I'm looking at a map, and if you just draw a line straight down from Memphis, you hit New Orleans. So they're another one that I'm not quite sure how they got into the Western Conference, although they were New Orleans Pelicans were created when Charlotte, I believe they were Charlotte. Were they the Hornets or the Bobcats when they moved? Yeah, they were the Hornets. Yeah, and then the Bobcats were when Charlotte recreated. Okay, so yeah, when the Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans, they just moved from the Eastern Conference to the Western Conference, even though they didn't really go that far looking on a map. But yeah, that's a little weird. The other thing is not really like where they're placed on the map sort of thing. It's actually the name of the division. In the Western Conference, you have the Northwest Division, the Pacific Division, and the Southwest Division. Now, Southwest, you think, I don't know, New Mexico, Arizona, Southern Nevada, Southern California, maybe far western part of Texas. But this Southwest Division is made up of the Houston Rockets, San Antonio Spurs, Dallas Mavericks, New Orleans Pelicans, and the Memphis Grizzlies. So you have a Southwest Division made up of 3 Central to Eastern Texas teams, a New Orleans, Louisiana team, and a Memphis, Tennessee team. And they represent the Southwest Division. That doesn't really make sense. I think they should rename it. And I have no idea what to rename it to. Maybe just the Southern Division. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if Louisiana and Memphis you can call Southwest. San Antonio, you could make an argument. It is in the south of Texas, but it's also very central as far as like east to west. But still, all 3 teams are central to eastern Texas. I don't think they're considered anywhere near what most people would consider Southwest. And the one team that you would consider Southwest, which would be Phoenix, is located in the Pacific Division. Yeah, I don't know, it's a little weird. Also, another thing, the Northwest Division, Oklahoma City Thunder are in that. And going back to geography again, Oklahoma City is in the center of the United States. And they're in the Northwest Division. Not really sure how that makes sense. They were created when the Seattle Supersonics moved over to Oklahoma City. Was probably 10, 11 years ago now. But like I said, they could always just realign divisions. Just because you started somewhere doesn't mean you have to end there. If you go back and look at Major League Baseball, Houston Astros, a couple years ago, they moved from the Central to the West Division. Central. Yeah, from the AL Central. Was it the AL? It might have even been the NL Central to the AL West. So, you could definitely move teams between divisions so you don't have to stay. It doesn't really make sense for a team in the center of the United States to be in a Northwest division. I think it's it's pretty easy to realign. Yeah, they were in the NL West. Oh, and the NL Central. They moved multiple times. The Houston Astros, that is. Okay. Yeah, they were in the West up until 93. Then moved to the Central in 94 until 2012. And then in 2013, they moved from the National League to the American League and were placed in the Western Division. Okay, cool. So, yeah, as you can see, there is some movement. If I had to, the Northwest is also made up of Denver, Portland, Utah, Minnesota. I don't know how the hell they got Minnesota in the Northwest. That's another weird one. Now that I'm looking at it more in depth, I didn't think there were that many issues with the NBA, but there definitely are. I don't know how Minnesota, the most northern state probably, right in the center of the country, is considered in the Northwest Conference or Northwest Division. I mean, there'd be you definitely realign a lot of that, and I mean, I would put Portland in the Pacific, along with all the California teams, and then remove Phoenix. Put Phoenix with the three Texas teams and maybe New Orleans. And then you can make another division with everyone left over. The Nuggets, the Thunder, Utah Jazz, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and the Memphis Grizzlies. I think that would be a good realignment. And I mean, in basketball, there's no it's not like football or even hockey where there's huge rivals per se. I mean, at least I've never heard of any other than, I mean, the usual, like the Lakers and the Celtics. But, I mean, that goes back decades. All these other ones, I mean, they're just, I mean, maybe the Texas teams. And then, I mean, now you got Golden State going up against anyone that LeBron James plays for. I mean, that's really just a person versus franchise rivalry. That's not franchise versus franchise. So, yeah, in NBA, I mean, that could use some reworking too. But ultimately, it's not that bad. It's not like NFL. Yeah, sounds good. And then NHL, one of the major ones for me, again, this goes back to Tennessee, Nashville, Tennessee, the Nashville Predators. They're in the Western Conference. And Nashville is, I mean, I think it was, when I drove cross country, I think it took about 3 hours to drive from Nashville to Memphis. So Nashville is 3 hours east of Memphis. It's in the center of the state of Tennessee, and they're still considered the Western Conference. I don't know how that happened. Maybe it's just because there are so many teams in the East with all the major cities. Almost all the major cities have a team. So they probably just said there's too many teams, so screw it and toss them to the West. Yeah, I don't know how Tennessee keeps getting roped into the West. And then another, I mean, not really a problem that I have, but something, I guess, no, I wouldn't call it a problem, but something that bothered me. So in the Eastern Conference, there's two divisions. You got the Atlantic and the Metropolitan. And the Metropolitan is made up of all of the teams from North Carolina up to New York City. So in there you got you have North Carolina represented, you got D.C., you got both of the Pennsylvania teams, you got New Jersey, and then you got the two New York teams, and then tossed in there is Columbus Blue Jackets for some reason. Columbus, Ohio. Not really sure they fit, but the other division, the Atlantic, is just a collection of all the other teams in the East. Like, there's nothing that stands out of each of these teams about why they should be grouped together. I mean, you got 1, 2, 3 teams from Canada. You got Detroit. You got the Florida Panthers. You got the Buffalo Sabres, the Boston Bruins, Tampa Bay Lightning. So they're all over the place. I mean, you got Florida, Massachusetts, New York, Michigan. And then, like I said, you got a couple up in Canada. So it's all along the East Coast. I don't know why they didn't just group it like every other professional league does. And if you're going to go that route, do, from Maryland down. Well, actually, that would overload one division because Canada, like I said, is represented by 3 or 4 teams. So I don't know. You do New York down, and you're probably still good. I mean, that would include you got the Sabres, the Lightning, Islanders, Capitals, Penguins, Hurricanes, Flyers, Rangers, and Devils. So that's 9 teams. So it would be 9 to 7. You could toss one of them back in there. I just feel like that should be better realigned. It's very heavy in a small area, and then from like DC, New York, and Pennsylvania, right there you got 5 or 6 teams. 5 teams? No, 6 teams. Yeah, you would have the Capitals, the Devils, the Rangers, the Flyers, the Penguins, and the Islanders. I mean, just those 4 states make up 6 teams, and then it's just a couple other random ones sprinkled in. And then the other division is just made up of everybody else in the East. Doesn't matter where they are geographically. So I feel like that could definitely use some rework. The Western Conference, it's, I guess it's as good as it can be. The Pacific is pretty solid. I mean, you got all the California teams, you got Vegas, you got Arizona, and then you got a couple teams in Canada, and then everybody else sprinkled in the West is all in the Central Division, which, they would be Central. I mean, the furthest west one of those Central teams is Denver, which isn't actually that west. If you look on a map, Denver's pretty central. So hockey, the West Conference for hockey isn't too bad, but the East is definitely kind of weird. Metropolitan works pretty well, but Atlantic is just a bunch of jumbled mess, just all the random teams left over thrown together. I feel like they could definitely realign that, and it would be a lot better. Baseball, though, is pretty solid. I don't think, it's hard to argue any realignment. Like I said earlier, the Astros just went into the NL West a couple years ago, and that's they're pretty solidly aligned. The West is, 2 California teams, 2 Texas teams, and then Seattle. And then you got the Central, which is all northern teams that are pretty close together. And then you got the East Coast, which is all teams right along the coast. So those all fit together. The NL, again, those all work together. So baseball is pretty good out of the 4 major sports. They obviously know what they're doing when it comes to division and conference alignments. The other ones could take note, maybe do some changes. Who knows? Maybe somebody will hear this and they'll get good ideas. So another thing I wanted to talk about, just real quick and brief. I don't know if you guys ever think about it much or if it bothers you. I never understood the point of having cars lowered. A lot of people like to make fun of people from the East Coast or people from the South about getting their trucks lifted and all that. But I think what should be talked about even more is the fact that people lower their cars. I know quite a few people who have done it, and I never understood the point. I remember one of my old roommates, he had 2 cars he got lowered, and one of them, when he lowered it, it was so low that anytime we were going somewhere with him, if there were speed bumps or something, he would have to go at it. He would have to go at the speed bump at an angle in order to be able to get over it, or else his car would get caught and wouldn't be able to go over it. And sometimes, depending on how big the speed bumps were, we would have to get out of the car until he went over them. I don't know. I never understood the point of that. It was, obviously, some people like it, others don't. Yeah, it was, I don't know. It was just something that I never understood. Maybe it's just because I'm not a car guy. He was definitely a car guy. But another thing that a lot of times I see with these lower cars, they tend to have slanted tires and wheels. Is there a point to that? Is it supposed to help with driving? I don't know. I think that's more ridiculous than actually lowering the cars itself to just have the wheels bent. I almost feel like it wears on the tires more that way. I mean, obviously, I could be wrong. I don't know too much about cars and about what that does to them. But I never understood the point of lowering a car, and definitely never understood the point of having the tires and wheels slanted inwards. I don't know. I always thought they only did that because they were broken. But I guess people do that stuff on purpose. So that's pretty much it for me tonight. Just quick update. The Toronto Maple Leafs and the Vegas Golden Knights just finished playing, and it got pretty ugly. It was tied at 1 going into the second period, and it was 1-0 going into the second period. In the second, the Knights ended up scoring 2, and the Maple Leafs scored 2. And they went to the third up 3-2. And then the floodgates opened after that. And in the third, the Maple Leafs scored 3. And they ended up winning the game tonight, 6-3. The Golden Knights didn't. They looked pretty bad to start off. The Maple Leafs did outshoot them. I think it was like 16 or 17 shots to like 8 in the first period. So it was pretty rough. One of the Golden Knights goals, I would say, was pretty lucky because the Maple Leafs goalie wasn't paying attention, and he just kind of threw the puck out with his hand, not looking to see what was around him. And the Knights player ended up stealing it, and he got a wide open goal. So that was one of their 3. I would consider that a pretty lucky goal. But, I mean, in pros, a goal is a goal. It doesn't matter what. It doesn't matter how you got it, as long as you score. But they did ultimately end up losing. I believe that's now 5 home losses in a row. They're doing pretty bad right now. But they definitely they also need to get it together if they're going to make the playoffs this year. Right now, they're currently sitting 3rd in their division behind Calgary and San Jose, who have a pretty big lead on them. And the Golden Knights have lost 7 of the last 9, which it's very bad. And 5 of them were at home. So they definitely need to pick it up, or else they could miss the playoffs this year after making the Stanley Cup last year. But we'll see. Still plenty of time left. I think there's like 2.5 or 3 months to go, something like that. They're sitting at 31-24, which is 55 games. So they got, 27 games left? I think they can do it. That's a lot of time to gain momentum, get a couple wins in a row. They'll get back to it. All right, well, that's it for me tonight. Thank you for joining and listening to me rant about terrible decisions with divisions and conferences in sports. Who knows? Maybe they'll hear me and they'll decide to change it. Doubt it, but you could always hope. All right. Hopefully I'll be doing another episode in the next couple days, so make sure you tune in. And don't forget to follow me on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and subscribe to my YouTube page so that you can get updates whenever I put out a new episode. Thank you guys for listening. Have a good night. Bye.